If it's Wednesday, all eyes on Iowa with Republican rivals Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley set to face off on the debate stage tonight as frontrunner Donald Trump hits the campaign trail and the courtroom in the final 5 days to the first in the nation presidential contest. Plus, Hunter Biden makes a surprise appearance at his own contempt hearing on Capitol Hill, riling up House Republicans as they pursue or threaten impeachment proceedings against the president, his Secretary of Homeland Security, the Defense Secretary, and the Attorney General. And President Biden prepares to hit the campaign trail again as one of his top allies in Congress warns that his election year message is not breaking through. My interview with Biden campaign co-chair and member of House Democratic leadership, Congressman Jim Clyburn, is ahead. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander here in Washington. We are just 5 days away from the Iowa Republican caucus and an intense fight for campaign momentum as the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley fight it out to become the primary's primary Trump challenger. That fight between DeSantis and Haley is taking center stage tonight. Literally, the campaign rivals are going to take the debate stage for the fifth time in their first head-to-head matchup, with frontrunner Donald Trump not attending. Time is not on either campaign side. DeSantis has bet big on Iowa, and a poor showing could effectively end his campaign. Haley is trying to overcome some recent stumbles on the trail. Both candidates and their allies are sharpening their attacks on each other in the closing stretch.
She's phony. You know, she doesn't have core set of convictions. She's coming in here. She's trying to be relatable, but just doesn't get Iowa. And I think that's becoming more and more apparent. And here's the thing. Her, quote, rise was media driven. There's not a lot of grassroots energy. You can talk to all these activists here. They're not seeing it. It's been media driven.
Every single commercial, God bless him, that Ron DeSantis has put on the air, there's not an ounce of truth. None of it.
DeSantis is desperate. He's lying because he's losing. But let's go. The problem is, if you have to lie to win, you don't deserve to win.
And as for President Trump, he has retained, even strengthened his frontrunner status during this campaign, despite those criminal proceedings, authoritarian rhetoric, and threats of political revenge. Now, tomorrow, he's going to again voluntarily leave the campaign trail for the courtroom, this time to appear at his civil fraud trial in New York. He wanted to deliver his own closing arguments there, but the judge has denied that request. And at a separate voluntary court appearance yesterday, you likely saw the former president baselessly accused President Biden of orchestrating the various criminal cases against him and warning there would be, in his words, bedlam in America if the cases proceed and hurt his election chances.
Numbers came out today that are really very mind-boggling if you happen to be Joe Biden. And I think they feel this is the way they're going to try and win. And that's not the way it goes. That'll be bedlam in the country. It's a very bad thing. It's a very bad precedent.
Big picture here with just 5 days to Iowa and with former President Trump having remade the Republican Party in his image. Haley and DeSantis are running behind Trump, but they aren't exactly running against him. As our friend Chuck Todd wisely wrote today, there is not much of a debate about the direction of the GOP. While I have no doubt that both Haley and DeSantis believe the GOP under Trump is headed in a terrible direction, neither appears to have the guts to say that. Perhaps the case in point, here is Nikki Haley's careful and calculated brushback of the former president from earlier this week.
Pro-Trumpers don't think I love Trump enough. Anti-Trumpers don't think I hate him enough. And I don't hate him. I told you I think he was the right president at the right time. But any policy that comes up, I'm going to tell you exactly where I stand on that policy. We've got to stop with this hatred back and forth. We've got to stop with these divisions. I don't have resentment for President Trump, but I don't think he should be the next president going forward. And I'm happy to tell you all the reasons why I think that is.
Joining me now from the debate site in Des Moines, Iowa, is NBC's Vitali and Dasha Burns as well. Dasha standing out in the cold. Dasha, we're going to get to you for that reason first here. The fifth debate for DeSantis and Haley tonight. What is the Florida governor's strategy with this one-on-one format?
Well, thank you, Peter, for taking some mercy on me. And look, I don't think anyone thought that this fight for second place was going to drag on this long, whether you talk to voters or the candidates themselves. Certainly, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis didn't think that at this point in the race he would be fighting a challenger for second place. And that's why tonight is going to be a big deal for him. Look, his campaign aides tell me that he's going to be trying to create that contrast with Governor Haley, that he is going to be looking for this opportunity to try to, what they say is try to hold her accountable for what they see as questions that she's dodged on the campaign trail. And this is a moment for both of them to really take each other head on after ramping up their rhetoric against one another, as you played there on the campaign trail and in interviews and on the airwaves, really, as we've seen. Anytime you turn the TV on here in Iowa, there is an attack ad from either the Haley or DeSantis campaign playing. And this is that opportunity without the noise of the other candidates that we've seen them on the stage with. It's just the two of them. They're neck and neck in the polls here in Iowa, and they get to take each other head to head tonight.
Allie, let me ask you about Nikki Haley then. She seemed to benefit in the past from being the center of those other attacks in previous debates. This could be a bit more of a challenge, though, for her. No, it's just the two of them.
Less places to hide, Peter. I think that's exactly right. At the same time, I think that this is something that Nikki Haley wants. You can tell a lot from people's closing messages here on the airwaves. Dasha points out the fact that Haley is always talking about the ads that are being run against her, whether it's by DeSantis himself or the former President Donald Trump. But you can tell that for DeSantis, the goal here in Iowa is to make sure that Haley's momentum is blunted. That's in part the role and goal of those attack ads. But then for Haley, her closing message here and her final ad is a bio ad. It's about her stance on the issues, her pro-life posture, for example. And you can tell that that's her attempt to maybe not alienate any other voters who might like her rivals, but to try to bring people to her cause in a more positive way. The Haley campaign's hope is that they can use this debate stage, as they have almost all of the other ones, as a chance to showcase the key parts of her stump speech. You can imagine, because we've seen these two candidates going at it on debate stages in the past, that because there's no one else on the stage, we're not going to see Haley sparring with Vivek Ramaswamy, and that means we will not have to watch her try to contain her disdain, frankly, for that one of her rivals. But when it comes to DeSantis, I think that this debate, frankly, would be an interesting one if it was 2028 in that Republican primary. Maybe then we would finally see some movement. But this debate for second place, while it's true, it's the accurate assessment of where we're at in this primary. Second doesn't get you a win in Iowa. Right now, the expectation is that that's Trump's. Of course, he is once again not on the debate stage. Yeah. But for these two folks, they're hoping that they can edge each other out for second place in Iowa. And for Haley, that means a springboard into New Hampshire, where polling does show her within potential striking distance of Trump.
And Dasha, I just want to get your take on all this. Obviously, Donald Trump's not going to be there again, so he's not really accountable to anybody in terms of answering tough questions here. But as a function of these two attacking each other, no one really ends up attacking Donald Trump.
No, that's exactly right. And it's what we've seen at these debates over and over again. But the fight for second place really does matter for both of these candidates because of the momentum that Iowa can give going into New Hampshire. And for DeSantis, they're looking at South Carolina. They know, we've all seen the numbers, New Hampshire is not his state, but they believe that Nikki Haley is really going to struggle in her home state, that South Carolina could be that wall that she hits, where they could then, after that, heading into Super Tuesday, turn this into a two-person race. They also see the numbers. They know Trump's way ahead, but there's also been some reporting I did with my colleague Alan Smith a couple of weeks ago, where there is some thinking in the Republican Party that should Trump's legal challenges or his health turn into something that does potentially stop him from becoming the nominee or from ultimately making it to November, whoever does end up in second place, especially a strong second, could be that contender to get the nomination if something were to go wrong for the Trump team. So that fight for second place matters for a number of reasons here, Peter.
All right, guys. Well, both of you, I guess, are booking your tickets for New Hampshire. We'll see which one of you ends up taking that trip. Allie and Dasha, we appreciate you guys. Vaughn Hillyard, also on the ground in Iowa for us, covering all things Donald Trump. Vaughn, let me ask you about this. Another debate, another Trump counter-programming event. I don't think we're going to anticipate that he's going to break any new ground here, but as a function of sort of holding these events and not really doing a lot of real interviews, he doesn't face any accountability. He doesn't get held accountable for any of the sort of the things he has said, most recently referring to January 6th insurrectionists behind bars as hostages.
Right, he's going to be doing his own town hall just down the road from where Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis will be squaring off. But this is going to be him and Brett Baer and Martha McCallum from Fox. For Donald Trump, this is his only event of the week until rallies here this weekend, and you just said it. We'll wait to see how hard-hitting the Fox town hall is with him here. But for Donald Trump, this is very much an opportunity for him to say he's here in the state and in the middle of appearing in Washington, D.C. at the immunity appeals hearing in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and then in Lower Manhattan for the New York civil fraud trial or our arguments tomorrow. Donald Trump has not had to square off with any of his competition. He said if it was to get really close with somebody, maybe he'd appear on a debate stage at some point. And that's why there's an extra incentive, not just to come in second for Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis here in Iowa, but also to try to make it somewhat close to compel Donald Trump come New Hampshire to get on the stage with them.
And Vaughn, for clarity, the former president's schedule this week suggests that he's pretty comfortable in Iowa. But as you look ahead to New Hampshire, as you just noted, are some of these recent polls giving the campaign pause, one of which shows him within single digits, or Nikki Haley within single digits of him there?
Right, it's hard to ignore, especially when you add on Christie's 12% in the polls. In one of those polls, the CNN poll, that then eclipses Donald Trump there. I mean, they still feel confident by and large when you go beyond the state of New Hampshire, from Nevada to South Carolina and beyond, where Donald Trump's polling numbers are sturdy. But if somebody like Nikki Haley were able to pull off a win in New Hampshire, it would be significant. And so that's where you have seen Donald Trump feel very comfortable about his position here in Iowa and instead turn his attention to the court hearings. Look, compared to 8 years ago, Donald Trump had 9 campaign events in the final week here in Iowa, participated in the GOP debate, and also had rallies in New Hampshire and South Carolina in the final 7 days ahead of the Iowa caucus. But Donald Trump isn't even appearing in New Hampshire until the day after the caucus. So, I think that this is one of those moments where we're going to be able to look back, Peter, if for some reason Nikki Haley has a true surge and is able to give Donald Trump a run for his money, because Donald Trump has very much slow-walked his candidacy in terms of on-the-ground campaigning over the course of the last year, and especially here in this final month.
And you can anticipate some venting from the former president as early as tonight. He wanted to speak at his civil fraud trial tomorrow. Now it looks likely that that is not going to happen, so he may use this stage as an opportunity to tee off on that as well. Vaughn Hillyard on the ground in Iowa for us. Vaughn, thank you. Stay warm, my friend. Appreciate it. To break down this moment for the Republican Party, NBC chief political analyst Chuck Todd is joining me on set. Chuck, nice to see you.
Happy New Year.
Appreciate your being here. So we are now just days away from Iowa. We've been talking about Iowa for 5 years, it feels like. And here, finally, it's just 5 days away. So much of the conversation, though, is about second place right now. Why aren't those two fighting for first?
It's a great question. They're not running campaigns to win this. They're not running campaigns to have a debate with Donald Trump either. They're not interested in, it's fascinating to me to watch, particularly DeSantis and Haley. They're trying to essentially endorse Trumpism without Trump. They're trying really hard to somehow separate Trump, the individual, from his voters. They're not interested in pursuing a flat-out debate. Hey, you were a failure in your first term. If you hadn't been a failure, you'd have been reelected. Yeah. They're not litigating this, and so when you're campaigning from this position of fear, and that's what they are, you're asking voters, well, let's see, I'll give you what you like about Trump, but without Trump, that voter hears, well, I either want Trump or Trump Light, and anytime you're offering light, most people, unless it's Miller Lite versus Miller Genuine Draft, do you ever prefer the light beer version? You usually want the real thing.
We read a bit of your column at the top of this hour. I want to read a little bit more because it kind of gets to this point, and I think this was smart. You say, I imagine both Haley and DeSantis will have even more to say about Trump and Trumpism after they lose this campaign to him. That is, if they determine that they have no futures in a Trump-led GOP. One gets the sense that both of them hold the delusion that somehow they can navigate this moment and get back into the Trump camp enough to be positioned as an heir apparent in 2028. Is that realistic for either of them?
I don't think it is, but I can tell you that's what DeSantis world thinks. And as, the whole idea...
Don't go too far, because if it doesn't happen here, you got to hold your fire for the next one.
So it's more of okay, you took your shot, you're not going to win, don't burn the bridge. I think I think we're seeing evidence of this, right? When a voter says to DeSantis, I don't think you're tough enough on Trump, right? He says, what do you mean I'm doing this, this, and this? He made a decision. He's just not going to do that. So Look, I think in the way our short-term attention span works, right, you know, are any of the 2016 candidates viable in 2024 other than Donald Trump, right? Marco Rubio, not viable. Ted Cruz, not viable. Ron DeSantis is not going to be viable in 28, but he thinks he will be. And then there's Nikki Haley, right? You know, when Christie has been sort of complaining about this idea when people are trying to push him out of the race, which, again, if you believe in stopping Donald Trump, Christie should be getting out. But I understand his frustration with Haley. Like, I'll endorse you, but don't embarrass me and become his running mate.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden, it's glorified the same thing Christie ended up doing 8 years ago, you know, essentially helping to mainstream Trump, right?
And for which he said, I made a mistake.
Right. I think if Christie at all wants to be principled about what his campaign has been about, he can't endorse somebody who eventually shows up on the Trump ticket.
Is there a world where Nikki Haley is on the Trump ticket?
Anybody who has spent time covering Nikki Haley, anybody who has spent time understanding her ambition, nobody believes that she would say no to Donald Trump. Now, I don't believe Donald Trump will ask her to be on his ticket because he is not, you know...
He's mentioned a lot of other names, by the way, including women that are not her.
That's right. And I don't think he doesn't want somebody that might eclipse him. We know that as far as star power is concerned. And he certainly wants somebody that wouldn't be there without him. Whatever you think of Nikki Haley has had a successful career without Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He'd prefer to find somebody like an Elise Stefanik or a Christie Noem who wouldn't be relevant nationally without Donald Trump.
Let me ask you a quick question. You were talking about Chris Christie. He said yesterday of Governor Sununu in the state of New Hampshire, he called him a liar for suggesting he was going to be dropping out of this race.
It was a weirdly angry retort.
He was clearly angry in that moment. But were he, under some circumstance, to drop out before the New Hampshire primary, how significant would that be, given the fact that Nikki Haley is within his number of points of Donald Trump right now?
I have to say, I think that he's actually doing Nikki Haley a bigger favor by doing it now, right? The question, I think nobody believed he was going to stay in the race.
You mean if he is to drop out now?
If he is doing this, he would actually be doing her a huge favor doing it before Iowa. Because it allows her, but it really does put the pressure on her, and it really does make, she needs a second place. It's sort of like she's got a 1% chance without finishing second and a 2% chance, okay? But her odds go up if she can finish second in Iowa, knock out DeSantis. I don't think DeSantis' campaign lasts more than hours if he doesn't finish second in Iowa. And then she might be able to slingshot it. And with Christie getting out before this debate, if that is what's happening, and there's all sorts of chatter, so we're not going to, you know, if he is doing that, he is doing her a huge favor.
Now, the irony in all of this...
Endorsement or not.
The irony in all of this is if she gets to South Carolina, that actually could be a brick wall for her, right? She may not have the support she needs in her own home state. Chuck, nice to see you. Appreciate your being here with your expertise. Coming up, how House lawmakers reacted when the president's son crashed his own contempt hearing in the House. That moment and what the White House is saying about it is next. Plus, President Biden looks to ramp up outreach to key voters in battleground states amid new questions about his political standing. You are watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back to Meet the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander. It has been a busy day on Capitol Hill as House Republicans push forward with their investigations into President Biden, his family, and his cabinet, starting with the surprise appearance by Hunter Biden and his lawyer, who crashed a public meeting held by the House Oversight Committee. Biden has refused to comply with the committee's subpoena to sit for a closed-door deposition, instead demanding to testify publicly. Moments ago, the House Judiciary Committee formally recommended contempt charges against Hunter Biden, that they go before the full House. His unexpected appearance today led to some chaotic moments in the hearing room. We do want to warn our audience that some of the language you're going to hear here may be viewed as offensive.
You are the epitome of white privilege, coming into the Oversight Committee, spitting in our face, ignoring a congressional subpoena to be deposed. What are you afraid of? You have no balls to come up here and...
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry.
Mr. Chairman,
if the gentlelady wants to hear from Hunter Biden, we can hear from him right now, Mr. Chairman.
I think that Hunter Biden should be arrested right here, right now, and go straight to jail.
That, of course, is the Republican Nancy Mace of South Carolina who is speaking there. Meanwhile, in a separate committee, House Republicans held their first impeachment hearing into Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas as they look to hold him responsible for the crisis at the U.S. southern border. So joining me now is NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Sahil, nice to see you here. Let's try to break all of this down. First, why did Hunter Biden show up today? What was the point he was trying to make by this?
Hey, Peter. Well, what Hunter Biden was trying to convey by making this surprise appearance is that he's not hiding from Republicans, that he's not afraid to testify as part of their impeachment inquiry into President Biden, looking for links to, his son's foreign business transactions, just that Hunter Biden insists on doing this publicly in the light of day for everyone to see. He and his legal team argue that Republicans are operating on bad faith political motives and will rip his comments out of context and distort them. So they say that he's willing to testify. It just has to be public. Now, the Republicans don't accept this view at all. They say that's not his decision to make. They're the ones who control the House. They're the ones who control the gavels. They issued a subpoena. They set the terms, and he didn't comply with it. And so they just voted moments ago, the House Judiciary Committee, after a long day of debating this, and some of the theatrics we saw earlier, voted 23-14 along party lines to hold Hunter Biden in contempt. The House Oversight Committee has yet to follow, but we expect that to be a similar result, Peter.
So let me ask you about what else has been going on at the Hill. House Republicans held their first impeachment hearing into Secretary Mayorkas, of course, the Homeland Security Secretary. But do they run the risk, Sahil, here of being too eager to jump into these impeachments?
Yeah, that's precisely the risk, Peter. If they don't make their case persuasively, impeachment always tends to be somewhat of a political issue where you have to convince the public that you're operating and doing it for the right reasons. In this case, they have some skeptics, including some who have typically sided with Republicans in recent years. Jonathan Turley, the law professor who's been a star witness for Republicans' many hearings, says he's skeptical of the claims that Republicans are making in terms of impeachable offenses here. He says in an op-ed that he agrees that Mayorkas has been dishonest, duplicitous, and even derelict. But he adds, Turley adds, quote, being bad at your job is not an impeachable offense, even if it's really bad. That's kind of where Republicans are here, they need to make the case that this is more than just a policy disagreement that they're litigating. And of course, Mayorkas is not the only person that they're threatening to impeach here. There's a growing list of them that includes President Biden. That inquiry has begun. Mayorkas is, of course, one of them. There's Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who's now the subject of articles of impeachment filed by a Republican congressman for that undisclosed medical absence. There's also Attorney General Merrick Garland, who James Comer, the oversight chairman, is threatening to impeach if the Justice Department does not charge Hunter Biden, does not prosecute him for that contempt citation. So this is sort of where they are. I think we have a response from the White House here, responding pretty aggressively. Let's show that on the screen. Spokesman Ian Sam says, quote, House Republicans are treating impeachments like an Oprah audience giveaway. They are disregarding the Constitution for the sake of cheap, baseless political stunts. It gives you a flavor of how the White House is going to continue to combat all of this, Peter.
And of course, Sahil, as you know well, as it relates to Mayorkas, on the one hand, he's negotiating with Senate Republicans about an effort to try to come to some border deal. And on the other side, you got the House Republicans who are going forward with their effort to try to impeach him. I want to go back to the House floor if we can. Speaker Mike Johnson, he's now getting his first taste of rebellion by conservatives within his conference. What happened?
Yeah, he's getting a taste of what former Speaker Kevin McCarthy got a taste of several times before he was ultimately overthrown by hardliners in the House. Just a couple of hours ago, a group of 13 House Republican hardliners tanked a rule that's a procedural vote on an unrelated piece of legislation to protest that spending deal that Speaker Johnson cut with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. It's mostly the Biden-McCarthy deal with some changes. He secured some additional spending cuts in the form of offsets, COVID unspent funds, and additional IRS cuts. These Republican hardliners say that's not enough, and they wanted to show him that they're very serious in protesting this. It's a real headache for Mike Johnson. Just 9 days before a shutdown, he still has that wafer-thin majority. He still has to deal with a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president. And one lesson that Republicans are learning, at least some of them are learning, is that you can't change the math of Congress by replacing a speaker. You still have to ultimately get bipartisan legislation if you want to make a law. Peter.
Sahil Kapoor, always appreciate your expertise and your reporting. Thanks for speaking with us. And coming up next right here on Meet the Press Now, wake-up call with Congressman Jim Clyburn, one of the president's most outspoken Democratic allies and campaign advisors. He is, quote, very concerned about Biden's standing with key voters. My interview with the congressman is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. We're back now, and as Republicans barnstorm Iowa during these final days before the Hawkeye State holds its caucuses, President Biden is continuing his outreach to the Frank constituencies that helped elect him 4 years ago. He has events planned for later this month in Nevada with its notable Hispanic population and in Michigan with its large Arab American population. It comes as President Biden has struggled with some Hispanic groups over the issue of border security, while his allies have sounded the alarm that his handling of the Israel-Hamas war has jeopardized his support among a key constituency there in Michigan, Arab Americans. Joining me now is South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, Assistant Democratic Leader and one of the national co-chairs of the Biden re-election campaign. Congressman Clyburn, it's nice to see you. I appreciate you making time to speak with us right now. I do want to ask you, in recent months, you told one of our colleagues that you're confident that black voters are going to turn out in force for President Biden. But on this most recent Sunday, you said that you're, quote, very concerned about black voters showing up for the president. What changed, sir?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Nothing changed. My concern is much more with black voters getting the right information, getting all of the information so that they will be informed voters. That's my concern. I believe very strongly that this president has done what is necessary to earn the support of African Americans all over this country. But I'm also concerned that when we report these results, they don't always tell the full story. And student loan debt relief is one of the best examples I can think of. The president attempted to reduce and eliminate the student loan debt in 5 different categories. He got sued in one category and was stopped from doing so. He pursued the other 4, which resulted in $132 billion in student loan debt relief for 3.4 million people. That never gets reported.
Yeah, and no doubt.
Only report the lawsuit.
I apologize for interrupting. No, you make a good point. And also, certainly, Republicans oppose the president every which way as it related to student loans, though. But as you speak about these concerns right now, what specifically can the president do? What does he need to do to ease your concerns?
More of what he's done in the last 2 big speeches. I think the speech up there after Valley Forge was a great speech. The speech at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston was even greater. He took the big picture offered by Valley Forge, by George Washington, and localized it to current conditions as demonstrated at the event that happened at Emmanuel Church. And so this is what I think needs to be done for the president to continue to forcefully speak out on these issues that are threatening the people of this country with their freedoms and with the democracy that we all hold dear. That, to me, demonstrates that the president is on track. And I really appreciated both those speeches. And all I can say is more, more, more.
Congressman Clyburn, do you wish the president had taken this tack sooner? Do you think he waited too long to do this?
No, I don't. You know, we do things when they need to be done. I do believe that if the president had done this before the Christmas holidays, it may have gotten washed away with all the reveille. Now that we are focused on a Congress that seemed not to be able to get out of its way, just today, the very first rule that the Republicans put forth in the new year, they failed. So the president is doing it at the right time, though it was a little frustrating to be in that waiting period. But I think we are exactly where we need to be.
Congressman, I want to ask you, some officials in Michigan, Democrats there, have complained that President Biden has been spending too much time in Pennsylvania in particular. We just learned that the president's going to be traveling to Michigan and Nevada, reported exclusively first by NBC News. He'll do that this month. Does the president need to step up his outreach in some of those other key battlegrounds where the election might be decided?
Well, you know, I don't know how to keep up with the percentages of the time that the president may be spending on one place or another, but I do believe that it's got to be everywhere. This is not a regional election. This is an election for 50 states, and and territories, plus the territories. And so we've got to be everywhere that we can possibly be, given the time constraints on being president of the United States, leader of the free world. He cannot be there as often as we would like, but as much as he can, we should do.
Of course, the president's time is the biggest asset he has during the course of a campaign. There has been recent reporting about former President Obama meeting with President Biden to discuss his campaign operation and specifically the need to better empower aides in his headquarters to make decisions. Are the president's struggles to this point a campaign issue, sir, or a candidate issue?
Well, I think that I met with the president around the same time the former president did, and there were others meeting with him as well. All of us are expressing to the president that which we think needs to be done. And so when I read the reports of what former President Obama said, it was nothing different from what I had said to him. So it looks as if all of us see the same things happening, and I think all of us agree on what needs to be done.
Sir, a couple other questions about recent headlines. We're learning more, of course, about the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's health challenges. He is, as you know, being treated for prostate cancer. Most importantly, his doctors say that his prognosis is excellent. But of course, this episode also raises serious questions about his judgment, not telling the White House about his hospitalization for days. Does this issue rise to the level where the secretary needs to step down or that someone else should serve as defense secretary in your view?
Absolutely not. Maybe he should have spoken earlier. He thought he was going in, as my understanding is, for a simple in and out procedure. And that happened, except that 4 or 5 days later, complications set in. Now, that changed the dynamics in a big way. Now, who was responsible at that point? I think the investigation that the White House is conducting will reveal what needs to be done, and I won't get out in front of that.
No doubt. Let me ask you two final questions. One, would you have advised Hunter Biden to appear at today's hearing? How big of a distraction, liability is he to the president's reelection bid?
Well, I think it's a distraction, but I don't think it's a liability. I think that all this is going to do is demonstrate what a good father Joe Biden is. We all, maybe not all, but I have children, and I'm concerned about them, and I want to be a good father to them. And I'm not going to let any office I hold get in the way of being a good father. And I think that's what Joe Biden is doing here, and I do believe that any public testimony will reveal that. In private, they come out and say what they want to say. They come out and paint what picture they want to paint.
And that's
what do they have to hide? Do it in public.
And that's been Hunter Biden's concern from the start here. Last quick question, if I can, for you. I just want to get your view on the status in terms of the risk of a government shutdown. How concerned should Americans be about a shutdown?
Well, I think they should be concerned about it, especially after today's vote. The fact of the matter is, the Speaker has reached an agreement with the Democratic leadership that he has about 10 or 12 people disagreeing with him. So if they do not give the votes that are necessary to pass this bill, they will shut the government down, and the American people will see that the Republican conference is once again doing what is necessary, not doing what is necessary to run the country.
Congressman Jim Clyburn, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for making time to speak with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
After the break, primaries, politics, and partisanship. It has been a busy day on the campaign trail and on Capitol Hill as the Republican candidates race to the finish line in Iowa, while Republican lawmakers race towards multiple impeachment proceedings. The panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we report at the top of the show today, it is a race for second place in Iowa as Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis take the debate stage tonight, trying to make last-minute gains with Iowa caucus goers ahead of the contest on Monday. But quality over quantity might also come into play next week, as bad weather might deter some of those less devoted supporters from getting out to the polls. We're not kidding about the bad weather. They expect the temperatures to be perhaps below zero wind chill. Joining me now is our panel, Betsy Woodruff Swan, the national correspondent at Politico, former Democratic congressman from Michigan, Andy Levin. Congratulations to the Wolverines. He is now a distinguished senior fellow at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Ramesh Ponnuru, the editor at the National Review and the columnist for the Washington Post. All right, Betsy, let's get to you right away. Tonight we got this debate. It's in Iowa. The former president, has his own event taking place, so you have sort of competing events this evening. But let's focus on the marquee matchup, which in effect is Nikki Haley versus Ron DeSantis tonight. It seems like this has been a fight for second from way back, and that neither one of them is willing to go after the front runner here. Describe what you're anticipating.
It's just been a little bit of a muddle between the two of them, and hard to make sense of how either of them sees fighting after each other for second place as something that's going to have any effect whatsoever on the very, very, very high likelihood that Trump becomes the Republican nominee. And this is what we saw happen in 2016, too. It was sort of lots of folks duking it out to be in second, who's going to be the challenger. And that duking out process lasted so long that a challenger never had a chance to seriously emerge.
Ramesh, who has more at stake in this? I guess each of them, right? If there's only going to be two of them at the end of tonight, or the end of Monday, perhaps.
Well, I think that DeSantis has the bigger test coming up the quickest, because Iowa is really where he has made his fight. And if some people say he has to get second in order to stay in this race, I think he has to get a pretty close second, too. Because
Haley knows she can go to New Hampshire where her numbers are pretty
good.
DeSantis may not be able to.
That's right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make. To you, Congressman, I just want your take on this as you watch this. This has been, you thought we were going to see this reckoning in the Republican Party, right? It was going to be what comes after Donald Trump. Neither one of these two is willing to initiate any reckoning here. They're all sort of playing in the Trump-adjacent space.
The Republican Party remains completely in the thrall of MAGA extremism. There's no question, Peter, and it's a huge problem for our whole country. Just speaking as a patriot, we need two political parties that are within the realm of democracy, small d, and they won't, as you said, they won't go after him. Politics is a rough sport. If somebody's way out in front, you got to compete with them if you want to overtake them, and it doesn't seem to be happening.
Ramesh, there's a name that the audience may not be familiar with, but he is a big power broker as it relates to Iowa. His name is Bob Vanderplatz, and he defended his endorsement of DeSantis with an op-ed in the Des Moines Register yesterday, saying that caucusing for DeSantis is a good thing for Trump. And I want to read just a little more of what he said and get your reaction. He wrote, "My endorsement, along with my vote for DeSantis, come from a friend doing what's best for the GOP, best for America, and best for Trump. If you believe that the system is being weaponized against Trump and many of us, then a DeSantis presidency is the former president's and our best line of defense. A DeSantis presidency," Vanderplatz writes, "ensures justice for Trump." Just want to get your take on that.
It's very squirrely, right? I mean, it is illustrative of the problems that Trump's challengers have had, because they have to, every criticism has to be some sort of bank shot criticism. It has to be coupled with praise
why
for the
buy
president.
Trump light if there's Trump to purchase?
That's right. And if Republicans believe, most Republicans believe, Trump was a successful president, if most of them believe, as unfortunately most of them do, that he actually won in 2020, and these guys aren't going to challenge any of that, then why shouldn't he be the nominee?
Yeah, Betsy, I want to talk about tomorrow. The president's been back and forth between the campaign trail and between the courtroom in recent days. So tomorrow, he had requested to speak during the closing arguments of what is his civil fraud trial in New York. It becomes tricky to keep track of these things. I want to make sure we get it right here. It's now been made clear by the judge there that the answer is going to be no. Does that play into the former president's narrative here? I would think that his lawyers and, frankly, a lot of his allies would be just as happy to see him not speaking a word in that courtroom.
It's like mind-boggling that it was something that was even discussed, and I imagine the only reason his lawyers were comfortable with him floating the idea was because they knew that legally it was going to be a non-starter. It was not going to happen. Either you're a pro se litigant or you're not a pro se litigant. You don't get to pick and choose your own adventure type situation in these types of moments. And of course, Trump is going to say, I'm being silenced once again by this judge, which is entirely predictable and which is what he's been saying the whole time. So does him saying that one more day and one more circumstance meaningfully help him? Does it move the needle? I doubt it. But, you know, it's his choice.
Congressman Levin, your reaction, former president, or the president, Joe Biden, in the course of the last week has been much more aggressive in his criticism of Donald Trump. First, there was the Valley Forge speech. Then he went to the AME church, where, of course, too many black parishioners were killed in that awful massacre by the white supremacists several years ago. Has the president waited too long to be this aggressive? And is this the most effective tactic going forward?
Well, I think the president needs to, and really all Americans need to, defend our democracy. And this is what's at stake if it's a Donald Trump nomination in the Republican Party.
But let me ask you, because he's given a not too dissimilar speech from this before many times. They go back to it. Is it just that they have to sort of hammer this in so it sticks for folks? Or is there a risk that the people who believe democracy is at stake are already on board with him and others aren't going to be swayed on that issue?
Well, I think the president has to do a lot to win re-election. It's a tall order. He's got to do well on the economy. He's got to do well on democracy. And frankly, we have to do better on foreign policy. Speaking as a Michigander, I am very worried about the Gaza situation's effect on not just Arab American and Muslim voters in my state, but young voters as well, who are turned off by what they're seeing.
If the vote were today, would Joe Biden win the state of Michigan?
You know, the vote isn't today. I don't even know what that means.
I've heard from leading Democrats in Michigan who have said to me if the vote were today, Joe Biden would not win the state of Michigan. That's why I asked that question.
It's a very tough situation at home, Peter, because people are so upset about Gaza. It's very rough right now.
Yeah, no Joe Biden, we should note, is going to be going to Michigan and Nevada in the course of the next several weeks.
That's a great thing. He needs to get out.
Well, the argument has been made by a lot of Democrats. He's got to get to some of these other battlegrounds not named Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's true. And Michigan is just going to be massively important. The huge question with voters in your home state is enthusiasm. Trump's not going to be campaigning on a pro-ceasefire, pro-Gaza platform. There's no way he's going to be anywhere other than far, far to the right of Biden on that issue. The question is enthusiasm. Do you have these young voters, these Muslim American voters, people who care about what's happening in this conflict, who are opposed to where Biden is? Do those people just not turn out? Do they decide it's not worth it? They're so frustrated with the Biden administration policy that they don't want to show up.
Well, it is that risk of erosion, I think, Ramesh, right? That perhaps is Joe Biden's biggest challenge as we look ahead to November.
And he's got demographic challenges in Nevada as well, where you've got the potential for slippage among Hispanics and the already weak position among white working class voters, of whom there are quite a few in Nevada. That's one of the reasons the Senate race was so tight there in 2022. So I think it's smart for the Biden campaign to be looking at Nevada as well.
Hunter Biden, you don't work in the White House, but Hunter Biden shows up on Capitol Hill today. If you're sitting in the White House, what are you saying to your television screen?
Probably not something I can repeat here.
Is he a big distraction, do you think? Is it something that matters to most Americans right now? I mean, when he's in the headlines, I'm sure the White House doesn't want the conversation to be focused on Hunter Biden.
You know, if you look back over recent presidencies, a number of presidents have had this difficulty with different kids and relatives. I agree, you know, with what your last interviewee said, that Joe Biden, in the end of the day, on this is going to come off as a good dad.
Congressman, I want you to stay with us, all three of you. We have some breaking news I want to get to at this hour right now. Campaign news, not from Iowa. Christie is suspending his campaign for the Republican presidential nomination. The former New Jersey governor and most outspoken Trump critic in this race will make the announcement, we are told, in just a few minutes at an event to take place in New Hampshire. Sources tell NBC News that Christie is not expected to make an endorsement at this time. His decision, though, to suspend his campaign could be a boost to Nikki Haley, who is looking to consolidate support against former President Donald Trump in this month's New Hampshire primary and beyond. I want to get right to NBC's Garrett Haake, who has more on this and the impact it potentially has on this race right now. Garrett, you're there in Iowa right now. Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are going to be watching this headline pretty closely, I'm sure.
Yeah, Peter, I think that's right. Look, and there's really a couple ways this can go. We have confirmed that Chris Christie is planning to suspend his campaign when he takes the stage in New Hampshire just a few minutes from now. It's not clear if he plans to make any endorsement now or ever in this race, and that could change the dynamics in a couple of ways. And when you look at the polling here, Christie's been in a distant third in New Hampshire, basically no matter how you slice it. But he appeals to much the same demographic of voters as has Nikki Haley up until this point. More moderate voters, more independent voters who, of course, make up a huge percentage of the potential pool of voters in New Hampshire, a much smaller presence here in Iowa. But Christie on the sideline presumably frees up those voters for any candidate who might be able to appeal to them. And obviously, Nikki Haley's the first person you think of there. Our team who's been in New Hampshire, when they talk to voters, they often see that overlap between voters who are trying to decide between the two. And Christie himself has been kind of an enigma on this because he has in the past, of course, very publicly defended Nikki Haley, as he did during that most recent presidential debate when Vivek Ramaswamy was attacking her. But he's also been very critical of her in recent days, including as recently as this morning, for her not being more outspoken about Donald Trump, not being willing to more clearly state that she wouldn't be willing to serve as his vice president, or to say, as he has, that he believes Donald Trump is unfit for office. So whether Christie stays on the sidelines or endorses Haley could have an effect here. He was obviously a very effective surrogate in 2016 for Donald Trump. The X factor here, as I heard from one Trump ally a short time ago, is that it might not change the calculation that much in New Hampshire because Christie does not bring with him very many Republicans, traditional Republicans or MAGA Republicans. His favorability numbers within the modern Republican Party are terrible. And while he's been a darling of the independents and a darling of kind of anti-Trump Democrats or perhaps right-leaning independents, he's not popular with the party, in part because he has been so aggressive in going after Donald Trump. And so we'll see what he has to say tonight and what he chooses to do over the next 2 weeks, I suppose, until New Hampshire votes. And I'm sure it'll be a topic of discussion tonight on the debate stage here in Iowa, Peter.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think you put your finger on a really important point here. That's one we're going to be watching closely, is the potential for an endorsement here, in particular because the basis for this campaign in many ways was, right, to take it to Donald Trump. And in effect, he had to start this whole campaign by apologizing, expressing, in effect, remorse for supporting, being the first candidate to stand side by side with Donald Trump the first time around when we did this. So it seems that that relationship between him and Nikki Haley, and whether he can feel comfortable that Haley would not serve as a vice president to Trump, is critical, because the last thing Christie, I would suggest, can afford to his own reputation is that he got out of this race and endorsed someone who ended up becoming a Trumper in whatever the ticket looks like in 2024.
Yeah, and he's said exactly that, Peter, on the campaign trail, that, you know, having made what he described as a decision between the lesser of two evils back in 2016 before endorsing Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton, he doesn't want to do that again. He wants to make sure that he can be comfortable sort of living with himself with the endorsement that he makes. And if he's to endorse Nikki Haley, he wants to be sure not only that she's not going to appear on a ticket with Donald Trump in 2024, but that she's not going to run with his imprimatur in 2028. So he's put all that out there. I mean, he's been very public about the idea that there are things she could potentially say and do to ultimately win his support down the line. I mean, her first opportunity to do that would be tonight. But of course, for Haley, she's got to walk a tightrope, because the electorate here in Iowa, which votes on Monday, looks very different from the one in New Hampshire. And this has been part of Christie's criticism of her, is that she has tried to be, he believes, all things to all people. Yeah. And by saying what he needs to hear in Iowa to get his support in New Hampshire, Haley could conceivably alienate voters she needs to have a strong showing here that then she would need in New Hampshire.
Yeah, Garrett Haake, by the way, excellent reporting. And can I say it's good to see your ears for once, given you've been outside in the frigid cold, covered up for the last several days.
It is very
glad
good to be
see
back
that they
inside.
still exist after the frigid temperatures there in Iowa. We'll be talking to you and watching you over the course of the next several days. Let's get back to our panel with this breaking news. Just want to get everybody's first reactions to this. First, Betsy, from you right now. All of a sudden, it makes New Hampshire a little bit more interesting, right? Who can gather what is, according to the most recent polls, I think roughly 12% of the vote that Chris Christie was holding on to. Remember, one of the polls showed the separation between Trump and Haley at roughly 6, 7, 8 points.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. It's a meaningful constituency that he has in that particular state. And if Nikki Haley is, betting her entire operation on doing really, really well and surprisingly well in New Hampshire, then getting Christie on board with her, no doubt, would be quite a coup. The question, I think, right now is what might Christie's team be trying to extract from Haley world in exchange for the most important endorsement of the moment.
We want to show you live pictures right now as we can show you what's happening in New Hampshire as we anticipate the former governor of the state of New Jersey, Chris Christie, to deliver that announcement that he's suspending his campaign. Ramesh, just your take on this right now and how you think this sort of, is this enough to sort of change the dynamic of this race right now? Because it's not like there's some other anti-Trump candidate in the race. Every other candidate has sort of been Trump, as I said, Trump adjacent.
Well, I think Christie's doing the right thing here because his campaign had run out of any point. If the purpose was to stop Trump, then once it becomes clear that your campaign is actually helping Trump win the nomination, then there's...
Because you're holding someone else back from potentially
Right, it loses
defeating
its rationale. And Christie has himself said that if he were to drop out, a lot of his votes would go to Haley or DeSantis. He did not specify where they would go. As to whether it makes it a real race, the race that political journalists have wanted and certainly the Trump opponents have wanted to see happen, that's not clear because the polling has been a little bit all over the place in terms of how much of a gap there really is, how far ahead is Trump, and is there any race that's even possible to break out?
Well, what's interesting is we're having this conversation just thinking on the fly. I mean, what happens to the Liz Cheneys, the Chris Christies, these other people in the course of, as we talk about the margins and the potential for erosion for Joe Biden right here, is there potentially some erosion of Republicans who sit it out on the other side who would have supported, I don't know, someone other than Donald Trump here? What does this say to you, though, Congressman, about the state of the Republican Party? That Chris Christie, who, ran it all on beating Donald Trump, is calling it a day before they even get to Iowa?
Well, I think in the immediate event, it probably helps Haley because I think whether he endorses her or not, most of those New Hampshire voters will go there. But it says something very dismal about the state of the Republican Party. In my view, we can't have a healthy democracy unless we have at least two parties that are in there honestly duking it out over policy. We disagree with each other, whatever. But this does not bode well for the Republican Party having the kind of reckoning it needs to have and coming out the other side as a legitimate party that stands up for democracy.
Again, let's show you those live pictures if we can right now. This is New Hampshire, where we're waiting for Chris Christie to speak just moments from now. We'll keep you posted and share that with you when we do hear from him shortly. Ramesh, last thought to you right now. We're going to hear from Donald Trump tonight. We're going to hear from the two fighting to be in second place on this. After Iowa, we go to New Hampshire. Does this race get past New Hampshire?
That is a very, very big question, and it could be an anticlimactic couple of weeks here where it turns out that just as it looked for the last several months, Trump is still winning.
Yeah, and then we watched Trump, by the way, campaign from a courtroom for a lot of the year 2024 as well. Betsy Woodruff Swan, it's nice to see you in person as always. Ramesh Ponnuru, nice to see you, former Congressman. Andy Levin, always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. We appreciate your being with us this hour as well. Kristen is back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with my friend Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.